In this video, we're going to take a brief look at the fourth principal part of verbs and the future participle. These topics are covered in the grammar for 3C on pages 168 to 72 in your text. Let's talk first for a moment about the fourth principal part. You have been learning the fourth principal part of non-deponent verbs for some time now. From the very beginning of this class, or of Latin 1 actually, when you have learned a new verb, we've asked you to learn four principal parts. So we taught you when you learned the verb amo, to love, that you should learn amo, amari, amavi, amatuus. Or for the verb capio, you should learn capio, capri, capi, captus. The fourth principal part is obviously that fourth form, amatuus and captus. So far we haven't used it, but you've been learning it all along. Your book is introducing these fourth principal parts for the first time, and it actually, in the Grammar for 3C, has a two-page section where it discusses the fourth principal part of verbs, and you can read that. You might get something out of it, but actually, the best way to learn these fourth principal parts is just to memorize lists of principal parts as we've been doing all along. It's really the only way, eventually you will learn them all. Latin does not have that big a vocabulary, and you will learn them all. Now, your book is introducing for the first time the fourth principal part because we are at last going to do something with it. You've been learning it all along, but you've had nothing to do with it. What we're going to do with it is we will be using it to form the future participle. One more note about the fourth principal part of verbs, because I know this causes some confusion. The fourth principal part of verbs ends in us or Transitive verbs, verbs that take direct objects, have us. Intransitive verbs, verbs that do not take direct objects, have For example, amo, the verb to love, which takes a direct object, I can say te amo, I love you, and use the direct object. Amo goes amo, amari, amawi, amatuus. The fourth principal part has a us. Habeo is also transitive. You can say I have money. Pecuniam habeo. It's transitive. It has a direct object. And so its last principal part is habitus. So we have habeo, haberi, habui, habitus. The verb eo, on the other hand, which means to go, is not transitive. It does not take a direct object. You can't go anything. And so therefore it has an in its fourth principal part. Eo, iri, ii, itum. And also venio, the verb to come, is intransitive. It does not take a direct object. You can't come anything in English, and you can't venio anything in Latin. So it has in the fourth principal part, and we say venio, veniri, veni, ventum. So, to sum up, transitive verbs have us in the fourth principal part, intransitive verbs have and there's actually a logical reason for that, but you shouldn't worry about it. It's fairly complicated, and we will learn about this in a couple months. For now, just know, transitive verbs take us, intransitive verbs take Now let's talk about forming the future participle. The future participle of non-deponent verbs is formed by removing the us or from the fourth principal part and adding urus. From amatus, we get amaturus. From ventum, from the verb venio, veniri, veni, ventum, we get venturus. From factus, from facio, facri, faci, factus, we get facturus. The future participle of deponent verbs is formed by removing the us from the perfect deponent participle and adding urus. Remember, the perfect deponent participle is that word before the sum in the third principal part. So, for instance, for egredior, when we say egredior, egredi, egressus sum, the perfect, or the deponent perfect participle is egressus, egressus. For minor, minari, minatus sum, the perfect deponent participle is minatus. So we use that form. And by the way, the perfect deponent participle, this form right here, is really the same form as the fourth principal part in non-deponent verbs. When we say minor, minari, minatus sum, minatus actually exactly corresponds to the form amatus, for instance. It's actually the same form, and that's why we use this. We use the fourth principal part in non-deponent verbs, but we use this form in deponent verbs because it's really the same form. So, if we have egredior, egredi, egressus sum, we take egressus and we wind up with egressurus. If we have minor, minari, minatus sum, we wind up with minaturus from minatus, and these two are the future participles. The future participle is an adjective of the first and second declension like multus, multum, multum. That is, a form like egressurus declines just like multus, multum, multum. And in fact, you could spell it out like an adjective and call it egressurus, egressura, egressurum if you wanted to. It means about to X, on the point of Xing, intending to X, or going to X. I put the going to X in red here because your book doesn't mention that translation, and in fact it is my favorite translation for this participle. Let's look at some examples. Here, weedy, in this first example here we have weedy. Weedy of course means I saw. Viros means men. This is the accusative plural, so I saw men. And then we have egressuros. So we have I saw men, or I saw the men about to go out, or going to go out, or intending to go out, or on the point of going out. So I saw men as they were going to go out is really what this would mean. Okay? Here's another example. We have Johannes in itis inituris Marcum conspicatus est. Of course, Johannes means John. Marcum is the accusative of the word Marcus, so it's the direct object. Conspicatus est means spotted, or sighted. So John spotted Marcus. Now let's look at this part, in itis inituris. Inituris is the future participle of ineo. That's in plus the verb eo, to go, right? So it means to go in or to enter. And the principal parts of ineo are ineo, iniri, inii, initum. So we take that last principal part, initum, and we remove the and we add urus, and we wind up with inituris. So this means John, going to go into the house, spotted Marcus. Here is another example. Julia locutura est. Julia is about to speak, or Julia is going to speak, or Julia is on the point of speaking, or Julia is intending to speak. Notice how locutura here, being a participle, has to agree in gender, number, and case with Julia, whom it's describing. I couldn't resist including this famous Latin line. Morituri te salutamus. Salutamus means we greet, and te means you. So this is we greet you. Morituri is the slightly irregular future participle of morior, mori, mortuus sum, to die. So morituri here means going to die or about to die. And it is nominative masculine plural here, nominative masculine plural here, because it's agreeing with the implied subject in salutamus, the we. So this literally means we, about to die or going to die, greet you. This is a line that supposedly was said by gladiators who were going into a to-the-death fight to Claudius Caesar. That's pretty much what I have to say as far as the introduction to the future participle, but I want to make one little side note, an interesting side note. Sometimes when verbs don't have normal last principal parts, the future participle is given instead. For instance, for the verb sum, you may remember the principal parts are sum, esse, fui, futurus. Futurus is actually a future participle. That form is used there because the normal participle for sum does not exist. So instead, you are given the future participle, which gives you similar information. The same is true for the verb fugio. Fugio means to flee, you maybe remember. It's fugio, fuguri, fugi, fugiturus. There is not a normal fourth principal part for this verb, so instead the future participle is given. You can recognize when this happens because you see this urus ending here. The urus ending is the mark of the future participle. Okay? So futurus means going to be, and fugiturus means going to flee. Fugio means to flee, so fugiturus means going to flee. And I just wanted to point out that the English word future comes from futurus. Originally in English, it was used as an adjective. Futurus itself is a participle, therefore an adjective. So, for instance, in Middle English, you would see phrases that were somewhat like future time, which really meant time going to be, future time. Eventually, this word developed a life on its own as a noun and became something like our modern word future, which means just the future, things that are going to happen. Its actual origin is very questionable, exactly what happened, but it may have something to do with the fact that the Latin futura means things going to be, right? This is a neuter plural ending, and so therefore futura is things going to be or things about to be. And that is how our English word future developed. Future is actually from the future participle of the verb to be, meaning going to be.
The end. This has been a Barking Blue Heeler production.